You begin with a question that sounds impossible to leave unanswered. Did 5 children really die in a house fire on Christmas Eve in 1945? Or were they taken before the flames ever finished the story? At first, the case looks like a tragedy with a cruel afterlife. A family home in Fayetteville, West Virginia burns to the ground. In the chaos, 5 of George and Jenny Sodder's children are never seen again. Fire destroys evidence. Grief fills the gaps. The obvious explanation is simple. The children died in the fire. Then you look closer, and the first problem appears immediately. No remains were ever conclusively found. Not 5 bodies. Not even fragments that clearly matched the missing children. For a fire that supposedly consumed them completely, that absence never sat right. House fires kill. They do not usually erase children so perfectly that nothing certain is left behind. That changes the question. You are no longer asking only how the fire started. You are asking whether the fire was ever the true event at the center of the case. You begin to realize this mystery is not just about a deadly night. It is about whether the official ending was accepted before the evidence could support it. The fire itself refuses to behave cleanly. George and Jenny said the blaze spread fast, but there were details that felt wrong from the start. The family's ladder, usually kept against the house, was missing. The 2 trucks George hoped to use to reach the upper floor would not start, even though they had worked before. In isolation, each detail can be dismissed. Together, they feel less like bad luck and more like interference. But there is one problem with treating those details as proof. Panic distorts memory. Machines fail in cold weather. In disaster, ordinary objects vanish into confusion. So the clues do not settle the case. They split it. Either the family was seeing sabotage in the wreckage of trauma, or trauma was the perfect cover for sabotage already in motion. Then there were the warnings before the fire. A man trying to sell insurance reportedly told George Sodder that his house would go up in smoke and his children would be destroyed. Another visitor noticed the home's wiring and made strange comments. These stories feel like the kind of details that become sinister only after disaster. Until you remember that George had been outspoken against Mussolini, and some believed that made him unpopular among parts of the local Italian community. Now the case widens again. The mystery is no longer just whether the children died. It becomes whether the family had reason to believe they were being targeted before the fire ever happened. You begin to realize this is not just a puzzle of missing bodies. It may be a story about motive hiding inside what looked like accident. The official explanation for the fire also never inspired much confidence. Early reports blamed faulty wiring, but Jenny insisted the Christmas lights had stayed on while the fire was already burning, which would make an electrical origin harder to accept. If the wiring theory weakens, the cleanest explanation weakens with it. And once that happens, every other odd detail grows sharper. Then came the phone call. A woman reportedly reached the Sodder house that night, but instead of warning anyone, she asked for a name the family did not recognize, with laughter and clinking glasses in the background. It sounds small, almost useless. But in a case built on timing, a strange call during the fire matters, because it suggests the night may not have been random chaos. It may have had witnesses beyond the family. Still, none of this proves the children survived. The strongest challenge to the abduction theory is brutal in its simplicity. Fires can destroy more than people expect. Investigations in 1945 were not modern forensic operations. Records were messy. Scenes were contaminated. Maybe the remains were missed. Maybe the family's refusal to accept the deaths kept every anomaly alive longer than it deserved. But then the case fractures again. A bus driver claimed he saw some of the missing children looking out of a passing car while the house burned. A woman at a tourist stop said she served breakfast to children, matching their descriptions the next morning, accompanied by 2 women and 2 men, all of them appearing watchful. These are exactly the kinds of sightings that haunt famous disappearances. They offer hope. They also offer no certainty. And this changes the question once more. You stop asking whether there were sightings. In old cases, there are always sightings. You start asking why so many reports in this case seem to point in the same direction. Not death in the fire, but removal from the scene. You begin to realize the mystery is not just about unreliable witnesses. It is about whether multiple weak signals can form a pattern stronger than any single piece of proof. Years later, the pattern deepened instead of fading. The Sodders put up a billboard with the children's faces, refusing the official story. Then, in 1967, a photograph arrived in the mail. It showed a young man who looked strikingly like one of the missing boys, Louis. On the back was a cryptic note. No sender. No explanation. Just enough to reopen the wound and keep it open. The photograph should have been the breakthrough. Instead, it became the perfect symbol of the whole case. A clue that feels intimate, specific, almost impossible to ignore, and yet impossible to verify. If it was real, it suggested one child survived into adulthood. If it was false, someone deliberately fed the family hope. Either way, it meant the case was still being acted upon long after the fire. By now, you can feel the real shape of the mystery. Every answer creates a deeper problem. If the children died, why are the physical remains so uncertain? If they were taken, who had the power to do it in the middle of a fire and leave so little trace? If the warnings, the missing ladder, the failed trucks, the sightings, and the photo are all coincidence, why do they cluster so tightly around one family and one night? That is why the case still will not close. Not because there are no explanations, but because every explanation leaves behind a residue that refuses to burn away. You begin with a fire. You end with something colder. The possibility that the real mystery is not what happened to the Sodder children, but how a case can be declared finished when its most important absences were never truly explained.